The storm had driven 6 travelers into the common room of the Bell and Thistle by the time the 7th came through the door, and Clara Whitmore, wiping ale from the long oak counter, did not look up at once. She had learned in 3 years of keeping her uncle's inn that most men who entered from rain wanted the same 2 things, a fire and a silence in which to warm themselves, and that the surest way to lose a shilling was to fuss. So she finished the length of the counter, set the cloth aside, and only then lifted her eyes to the man shaking water from a dark blue coat at the threshold. He was tall, and he filled the doorway in the way that made the farmers near the hearth go quiet, without knowing why they had. Rain had flattened his dark hair against his brow. His boots were good, better than good, the leather supple and mud-spattered from hard riding, and when he drew off one wet glove she saw on the smallest finger of his left hand a ring of heavy old gold, worked with a crest she could not name but knew at once did not belong on the hand of a man walking into a country inn on the Bath Road in the 3rd week of an ugly November to the room. He was simply a gentleman caught by weather. To Clara, in the space of a breath, he was a question with no comfortable answer. You have watched a stranger come into a room and known, before a word, that he carried more than his coat. Hold that feeling. She did. She wiped her hands on her apron, which was clean, but had been turned once at the hem where it had worn thin, and she came around the counter because her uncle was abed with his bad chest and there was no one else. The gentleman was already looking at her, not the way men looked. His gaze went to her face and stayed there, level and unhurried, as though he were reading a page and had found in it a word he had not expected to see in such a book. "You keep this house," he said. It was not a question. His voice was low and even, a voice accustomed to being answered. "My uncle keeps it," she said. "I keep it for him while he is ill. We have a room, sir, if you want one, and stew, and the fire, such as it is." "I want all 3, he said, and then after a pause in which his eyes moved once briefly, to the worn hem of her apron and back to her face. "And I want you to stop calling me sir, before someone here does it, who means it." She did not understand him. She would not understand him for a long time. But her heart, which had no permission from her sense, gave a single hard knock against her ribs. And she was angry at it, and she turned to fetch the stew so that he would not see her face. The Bell and Thistle sat where the Bath Road bent around a shoulder of chalk hill, 4 miles from the nearest town of any size, and a full day's ride from anywhere a man in a coat like that ought to be sleeping. Clara had come to it at 19, after the fever took her mother and left her father a shell who followed his wife inside a year, and her Uncle Ned, her mother's brother, had given her a bed and a place behind the counter, and never once pretended it was charity. She had been grateful. She was grateful still. But gratitude, she had found, was a house one could live in without ever calling it home. And at 22 she had begun to understand that the road outside her window carried other people's lives past her door, and would never once stop to carry hers. The room had decided long ago what she was. She had heard it said. The innkeeper's niece. The girl behind the counter. Pretty enough for a country house, but with nothing to her name and no name worth the having. She had learned to let it pass over her the way she let the rain pass over the roof, because to argue with the verdict is to grant it a hearing. The gentleman gave his name as Mr. Hartley, which she did not believe because he gave it a half-second too late, the way a person names a thing they have only just decided to be called. He ate the stew without complaint, and more slowly than a hungry man eats. He asked her nothing about herself, which she noticed, because everyone asked if only to have something to say. Instead, he watched the room. He watched the farmers and the carter dozing by the fire, and the 2 wool merchants arguing prices in the corner, and Clara understood that he was not resting. He was waiting. And a man who waits in a place like this, she thought, is a man from whom something is coming, or from whom something has been taken. She learned the shape of him over 3 days because the storm did not lift, and the Bath Road turned to a river of clay no coach would attempt, and so the Bell and Thistle held its travelers the way a cupped hand holds water. The wool merchants left on foot the second morning, cursing. The carter got his wheels free, and went. But Mr. Hartley stayed, and paid for his room in coin, so new it had not yet dulled, and each evening he took the settle nearest the fire, and each evening his eyes found her at her work and rested there, and each evening she felt the weight of that resting, and did not know whether it warmed her or frightened her. On the second night the ring caught the firelight, while he turned a cup in his hand, and she saw the crest again, and this time she saw that he saw her see it. He did not hide the hand. He set the cup down and looked at her across the room, and something passed over his face that she would later understand was a decision being weighed, and then he looked into the fire and let her keep the question. What she did not yet know was that the man calling himself Hartley had come to that inn precisely because it was the last place on earth anyone would look for him, and that the ring he did not trouble to hide was the one thing in the world he could not make himself take off. His name was Julian Ashworth, and he was the Earl of Ravensmere, and 11 days earlier he had stood in a cold church in Somerset and watched them put his younger brother into the ground. That much she would learn in time. What she learned first was smaller and stranger. She learned that he could not abide waste. When the scullery maid, a slight girl of 14 named Bess, dropped a crock of dripping and stood white-faced, waiting to be struck, it was Mr. Plink. Hartley, who crossed the room before Clara, who crouched and set the crock upright, and said to the child in a low, even voice, "It is only dripping. Fetch a cloth." And Bess, who had been slapped for less by better-fed hands, looked at him as though he had spoken in a language she had given up hoping to hear Clara had seen it. She had not been meant to. And when he rose and turned and found her watching from the passage, he did not smile, and he did not explain. He only held her eyes for the length of a breath, and then he went back to his settle, and Clara stood in the passage with the cold striking up through the flags, and understood that whatever this man was, cruelty was not in him, and that this was a more dangerous thing to know about a stranger than any crest on any ring. On the third day the trouble arrived, as trouble does, in a good coach. It came through the rain with a crest on the door that half the county would have known, and it disgorged into the common room a man of perhaps 35 in a caped greatcoat, and behind him a lady in furs, who looked at the low ceiling and the smoking fire and the earthen floor with the particular stillness of a person deciding not to touch anything. The man's name, Clara gathered, was Sir Marcus Vane. He wanted the best of the inn's rooms, which was not saying much, and he wanted it warmed, and he wanted, above all, to be seen to want these things by everyone present, because a man like Sir Marcus did not enter a room so much as claim it. He did not notice Mr. Hartley at first. Mr. Hartley had gone still on his settle in the corner, the way a man goes still when he does not wish the eye to travel to him, and for a moment Clara thought he had simply grown tired of the world's attention. Then she saw his hand. It had closed slowly around the arm of the settle, and the knuckles stood pale, and she understood that this stillness was not weariness. It was the stillness of a man who has seen, across a crowded room, the one face he came 4 miles into the wilderness to avoid. "You," said Sir Marcus, and the whole room turned. He had found the corner. He crossed to it in 3 strides of his fine muddy boots, and he stood over the settle, and his voice, when it came, was pitched to carry. "Ravensmere, my God! Half of Somerset thinks you have thrown yourself in a river, and here you sit in a hedge tavern being served stew by a tavern wench." The word landed in the room like a dropped plate. Clara felt it strike her, flat and public and precise, and she felt the farmer's eyes flick to her and away, and she kept her hand still on the counter, because to move was to show it had touched her tavern wench. To Sir Marcus, she was the smallest thing in the room. A detail, a way of measuring how far a great man had fallen. She had been called worse. She had never before been called anything by a person who did not think of her as a person at all. And Julian Ashworth, Earl of Ravensmere, who had come to this inn to be no one, rose from the settle. "Sir Marcus," he said. His voice had changed. It had not risen. It had cooled, and cooled all the way through. And Clara heard in it for the first time the register of the man he actually was, the one the ring belonged to. "I will not," said Sir Marcus, delighted. "Why should I?" You have a duty in Somerset, and you have run from it. And now there is a matter of a guardianship, and an estate that will not keep. And I have ridden 3 days to find you, and I find you here." His eyes went again to Clara, and his mouth curved. "Though I begin to see the attraction of the country." Clara set down the cup she was holding before her hand could betray her by shaking. She had understood 2 things at once: that the stranger at the inn was a nobleman. In truth, an earl. A man whose fall from his own life had brought him to her uncle's fire. And that he had, in the space of a breath, become the most dangerous kind of trouble a woman in her position could invite, which was the interesting kind. She did not know yet why he had run. She only knew, watching him stand between her and Sir Marcus like a shutter drawn against weather, that he had put himself there on purpose, and that no one had asked him to. That night, when the coach party had gone up to the warmed room and Sir Marcus's voice had finally ceased carrying through the floorboards, Julian found her in the yard. She had gone out to the well because she could not sleep, and because the work of drawing water was a thing her hands could do while her mind ran, and she had not heard him come until he was there, a shape against the clearing sky, the last of the storm cloud tearing off the moon behind him. "You should be inside," he said. "It is cold." "I am drawing water," she said. "It is what I do." "Not tonight." He took the rope from her hands. He did it without asking, and she let him, and she was angry at how easily she let him, and she watched him draw the bucket up, hand over hand, with the ring flashing dull gold in the moonlight. He set it on the well lip. He did not step back. "He called you a name," Julian said. "In there I will not repeat it. I want you to know that I heard it, and that it was false." Something turned over in Clara's chest, painful and warm. "It was not false," she said, because she had promised herself years ago never to want what she could not have, and the wanting had started, and she was trying to kill it before it could grow. "I am the innkeeper's niece. I serve stew to men from coaches. That is a plain fact, my lord, and you naming it kindly does not change what it is. So you know what I am," he said. "I know what your ring is." She met his eyes. The cold had raised the color in her face, and she was glad of the dark. "I do not know what you are. You have not told me, and I have not asked, and I think that is the only reason you have stayed 3 days under this roof, because I did not ask." For a long moment he said nothing. And the moon came fully out and laid its light along the yard, the mud silvered, the well rope beaded with wet, and she saw his face clearly for the first time, and she saw that it was not a cold face. It was a face holding something back with both hands. "His name was Edmund," Julian said. "My brother. He died 11 days ago of a fever that took 4 days, and I sat with him for all 4. And on the last night he asked me to promise I would raise his son. And I promised, and then he died, and I got on my horse and I rode until the road ran out." He looked down at the ring. "This was our father's. Edmund should have had it. He was the better man. He would have kept the promise cleanly. I am not sure I can keep it at all, and so I ran from the boy who is now my ward, and from the estate that is now my burden, and from every face in Somerset that will look at me and see the wrong brother left alive." Clara stood very still. She had asked for nothing, and he had given her this, and she understood that it had cost him, and that he had paid it deliberately the way he had paid for his room in bright new coin. "You did not run because you are cruel," she said slowly. "You ran because you loved him, and you are afraid you will fail the thing he loved most." His head came up. "I have kept an inn for 3 years," she said, "and I have watched men run from grief through this door more times than I can count. It looks like cowardice from the outside. It is not. It is a man who cannot yet bear to be needed by anyone else, while the one who needed him most is gone." Julian Ashworth looked at her across the silvered yard as though she had reached into his chest and named a thing he had not been able to name himself. His hand had come up, halfway toward her face, and it stopped there in the cold air between them, and neither of them moved, and the water dripped from the rope, and Clara's heart beat so hard she was sure he could see it in her throat. He lowered the hand. He was a gentleman and she was under her uncle's roof, and he would not. "Go inside, Clara," he said, and her name in his mouth was a thing she had never heard before, low and deliberate, the first time he had used it. "It is cold." She went inside. She did not sleep. And you, who have felt the pull of a thing you have told yourself 100 times you may not have, will know the shape of the night she passed. In the morning the road was passable, and Sir Marcus meant to be gone by noon, and he was not a man to leave a matter unfinished. He came down early. He took the best seat by the fire, the one Julian had used, and he called for chocolate the inn did not have and settled for coffee. It barely did. And he watched Clara move about her work with the frank assessing attention of a man pricing a horse. She felt it. She kept her back straight and her hands busy. She had decided, in the sleepless dark, that whatever passed between her and the Earl in the moonlit yard had been a single stitch dropped from a garment neither of them would ever wear, and that the sensible thing, the only thing, was to let it be nothing. Sir Marcus had other plans. "Girl," he said when she came to clear his cup, "come here." She came, because there was no version of not coming that did not cost her more. "You are wasted here," he said, and he said it kindly, which was worse. "A face like that behind a country counter. I keep a house in town. I have need of a girl who knows how to keep quiet and pour a drink and be pleasant to gentlemen." He let the words sit. "The wages would be a good deal more than an uncle's charity. Do you take my meaning?" She took his meaning. It was an old meaning, older than the Bath Road, and it had been offered to her before by lesser men in lesser coats, and she had always answered it the same way, with a curtsy and a lie about a betrothed in the next county. She opened her mouth to do so. "Now, she does not," said Julian. He had come down the stairs without a sound. He stood at the foot of them in yesterday's coat, and the ring was on his hand, and the cold register was back in his voice, all the way through. And the room which had learned in 3 days to feel the weather change when this man spoke, went silent. "She does not take your meaning," Julian said again, crossing the floor without haste, "because she is not yours to take a meaning at. You will finish your coffee, Sir Marcus, and you will go to Somerset, and you will tell whatever waits for me there that the Earl of Ravensmere will come when he is ready. And not 1 hour before, and you will not again in my hearing offer a position to a woman under my protection." The word fell into the room, and every soul in it heard it. Under my protection, Clara felt the blood leave her face and then rush back into it. She had not been placed under anyone's protection in her life. She had not known it was a thing that could happen to a girl behind a counter, and she understood, watching Sir Marcus's confident mouth open and find nothing to say, that Julian had not said it to shame him. He had said it because it was true, and he had discovered it was true in the moment of saying it, and he was as surprised by it as she was. Sir Marcus recovered. Men like him always recover. "Protection," he said, and he laughed. But the laugh had a crack in it. "You will make yourself absurd, Ravensmere. An earl and an innkeeper's drab. You cannot mean it. Half the county will hear of it by Sunday." "Let them hear," said Julian. And that was the whole of it. He did not raise his voice. He did not strike the man, though Clara saw the wish too in the set of his shoulder. He merely stood between Sir Marcus Vane and the counter he had leaned across, and he waited. And Sir Marcus, who had ridden 3 days to bring an earl to heel and found instead an earl who would not be brought, rose and gathered his greatcoat, and went out to his coach with his lady in furs. And the good crest on the door wheeled away down the Bath Road and was gone. The common room let out its breath. Clara did not. She stood behind the counter with the cleared cup still in her hand, and she looked at the man who had said the word protection about her in front of 6 witnesses. And she found she was afraid, more afraid than Sir Marcus had made her, because Sir Marcus had offered her a thing she could refuse, and Julian had offered her a thing she wanted. And want was the one luxury she had never allowed herself. "You should not have," she said when the room had emptied to its ordinary custom, and they stood alone by the dying fire. By Sunday, it will be as he said. They will say the Earl of Ravensmere keeps a woman at a hedge-inn. It will follow you to Somerset. It will follow you to the boy. Let it follow me, Julian said. You do not understand. Her voice cracked and she hated it. I am not refusing you out of pride. I am refusing you out of sense. I have nothing, my lord. No family that signifies. No fortune. No name a herald could find. You have an estate, and a ward, and a title, and a whole county waiting to judge whatever you do next. A man in your place marries a lady with land beside his own. He does not marry the girl who drew his water. I have not asked you to marry me, Julian said. The words stopped her. Heat flooded her face. She had said the thing aloud, the vast, presumptuous thing, and he had not, and she wanted the earthen floor to open. I have not asked you, he went on. And now he crossed the small distance between them, and now his voice was not cold at all. It was low and rough and entirely his own. Because I have known you 3 days, and a man does not ask that of a woman in 3 days without being a scoundrel. But I will tell you what I have decided in those 3 days, because you have been honest with me in a yard at midnight, and you have earned the same. He was very close. She could see the flecks of gray in his eyes, the shadow of exhaustion under them, the small white line of an old scar through his left brow that she had not noticed before. I came here to be no one, and you did not need me to be anyone. You did not ask my name or my rank or what I could do for you. You served me stew and drew your water and let me sit by your fire and be for 3 days simply a man. Do you know what that is? To a man who has spent his whole life being an heir, and then a spare, and now an earl who cannot want the thing he has inherited? Do you know what it is to be looked at, once, by someone who sees the man, and not the coronet? Julian, she said. It was the first time. She had not meant to say it again, he said. She could not. Her throat had closed. His hand came up, the one with the ring, and this time it did not stop in the cold air between them. It reached her face. His fingers were cold from the yard and warm at their tips, and they touched her cheek as though she were something that might break. And she turned her face a fraction into his palm before she could tell herself not to. She felt him go still at that, felt the breath stop in him, felt the whole tall strength of him held motionless by the simple fact of her cheek against his hand. I want, he said, and stopped, and began again because a man like Julian Ashworth did not leave a sentence half-built. I want to be near you, not for a season, not as Sir Marcus meant it. I want to sit by your fire when I am old. I have wanted very little in my life that was for myself and not for the name. I want this. I want you. And I am terrified, because the last person I loved died holding my hand. And I do not know how to want a thing and not lose it. The fire ticked in the grate. Outside, a late bird tried the cleared air. Clara stood with her cheek in the hand of an earl and understood that the sensible thing and the true thing had at last parted company, and that she was going to choose the true one, and that it would cost her the safe gray house of her gratitude, and that she did not care. Then do not lose it, she said. Take me to Somerset, not as your drab, and not as Sir Marcus's girl. Take me to meet the boy who needs raising, and let me stand beside you while you learn how. And if at the end of a year you still want to sit by my fire when you are old, then ask me the vast, presumptuous thing, and I will give you the answer I already know. He kissed her. Then it was not the kiss of a man who had spent his want. It was soft, and slow, and full of everything he had held back with both hands in a moonlit yard. And it was full of promise, and when it ended, he pressed his brow to hers and stood there breathing. And the ring was cold against her jaw, and neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing left that needed saying. They did not go that day. There was the matter of her uncle, who woke to find his niece had a suitor with a coronet, and took it once he had recovered from a fit of coughing that nearly finished the business, with the dry good humor of a man who had always known the girl was worth more than his inn. There was the matter of Bess the scullery maid, whom Clara would not leave to another mistress's hand, and who was to come to Somerset as her own maid, and who wept when she was told and could not say why. There was the matter of the inn itself, which Ned would keep, but which would have a new sign painted in the spring, because Clara had asked it, a bell and a thistle, and beneath them a single sprig of ravensbane in dark green, so that any traveller who wished might know the house where an earl had once come in from the rain and stayed. They went in the second week of December, in a hired coach, because Julian's own was in Somerset, and he found he did not mind. And the Bath road that had held them was frozen hard and easy under the wheels. Clara watched the chalk hill fall away behind them. The shoulder of it she had looked at from her window for 3 years, and she found she could look at it now without the old ache, because the road that had always carried other people's lives past her door had, in the end, stopped for hers. The house at Ravensmere was grey stone and old, and it stood in a park bare with winter, and the boy was waiting on the steps. He was 7 years old, and his name was Thomas, and he had his father's dark hair and his uncle's grave stillness, and he had been told that his uncle, the Earl, was coming home at last and had refused to go inside, though the cold was bitter. And he stood on the top step in a coat too thin for the weather, with his chin up and his eyes fixed on the drive. A small, proud figure, holding his ground against a world that had taken his father and left him waiting. Julian was out of the coach before it had fully stopped. Clara watched him cross the gravel, and she watched him go up the steps, and she watched the tall Earl, who had told her he did not know how to be needed, drop to one knee on the cold stone in front of the child, so that their eyes were level. "I am sorry I was so long," Julian said. Thomas looked at him. The chin held for a moment more. Then it wavered, and the small, proud figure came apart, the way a thing comes apart that has held itself together, far past its strength, and the boy went into his uncle's arms and stayed there, and Julian held him on the cold steps of the grey house, and did not tell him not to cry. And Clara stood by the coach with the winter wind in her thin travelling cloak, and understood that she was watching a man keep a promise he had been sure he could not keep, and that he was keeping it because he had been reminded, in a hedge tavern, by a girl who drew her own water, that a person can be seen exactly as he is, and wanted anyway. The county did talk, that winter and into the spring. Sir Marcus saw to that, telling the tale of the Earl and the innkeeper's drab in every drawing-room that would have him, and there were doors in Somerset that closed to Clara Whitmore before she had ever knocked on them. She did not knock harder. She kept the house instead. She learned its passages and its people, learned which of the maids had been unpaid since the old Earl's illness and saw them paid, learned that the boy would not sleep unless a candle was left burning and left it, learned Julian in the long, quiet evenings by the library fire, the shape of his grief and the slow easing of it, the way his hand found hers, across the arm of a chair without either of them remarking on it. And in the spring, when the park had greened, and the bare trees had come into leaf, and the ache had gone entirely out of the house, the talking answered itself. It answered itself at the Ravensmere ball, which Julian gave because the estate had always given one, and because he had decided the county might come and look at what it had been whispering about, and judge for itself, and be welcome. They came for the spectacle, they came many of them, to see the drab in her borrowed finery make her mistakes. Sir Marcus came, invited, because Julian had said coldly that a man who wished to keep his lies healthy should be made to tell them to your face, and he stood at the edge of the great candle-lit room in his fine coat and waited for the country girl to disgrace herself. She did not disgrace herself. She stood beside the Earl in a gown of soft green that he had chosen, and she had not wanted him to pay for, and she greeted 300 guests by their proper names and stations, because she had spent 3 years learning to remember every face that came through a door, and she was gracious to the women who had shut their doors to her. And she did not once let the room see that any of it cost her. Near midnight, Sir Marcus, who had drunk enough to mistake malice for wit, said it again. He said it to a knot of guests near the terrace doors, loudly, in the way of a man who wishes to be overheard. "An innkeeper's drab in an earl's ballroom. I give it a 12-month before he tires of the novelty." The nearest guests went still. The music between one dance and the next had stopped, and the words carried the length of the great room the way such words do, into the exact silence built to receive them. And Clara, standing near the head of the room with her hand on the boy Thomas's shoulder, felt the old flat public strike of the label land on her one final time. Julian crossed the room. He did it without haste and without a word, past the still guests and the stopped musicians and the diamonds catching the candlelight, and the whole bright company turned to watch the Earl of Ravensmere walk the length of his own ballroom to the woman at the head of it. He did not go to Sir Marcus. He did not so much as look at him. He came to Clara, and he took her hand from the boy's shoulder and raised it, and he turned to face the 300 faces that had come to judge her, and into the silence he had built by crossing it. He spoke. "This is the future. Countess of Ravensmere." 7 words. He said them once. He did not embellish them. He let them stand in the silence and be understood, and the silence held for 1 heartbeat, 2, and then it broke, not into the scandal Sir Marcus had come to feed on, but into the small human sounds of a room rearranging its verdict, a murmur here, a lady's fan opening there, an old dowager near the fire saying distinctly that it was about time the boy chose sense over blood. And Sir Marcus Vane, who had ridden 3 days in November to bring an earl to heel and had spent a whole winter telling a story he was now watching end the wrong way, stood alone by the terrace doors with his lie dead in his mouth, and after a moment, finding no one would meet his eye, he set down his glass and went out into the spring dark, and no one marked his going. Julian did not watch him leave. He was looking at Clara. "You might have warned me," she said, under the music that had started up again, and her voice was not quite steady. "I might have," he agreed. "I found I could not wait for a better moment. I have wasted enough of them being afraid." The old scar lifted with something that on his grave face amounted to a smile. "You have not given me my answer, Clara." "It has been a good deal longer than a year, by the reckoning of how it feels." "It has been 4 months," she said. "It has been my whole life," said the Earl of Ravensmere. "The part of it that was worth the having. Ask me nothing back. Only tell me whether I may ask you the vast presumptuous thing at last." She looked up at him in the candlelight of the room that had come to judge her and had stayed to change its mind, and she thought of a stranger shaking rain from a dark blue coat, and a ring he could not make himself take off, and a hand that had stopped in the cold air of a yard and then had not stopped. And she gave him the answer she had known she would give since the 3rd night, when the firelight had caught the crest, and he had chosen to let her keep the question. "You may ask me," she said, "and you may know the answer before you do." They were married at Ravensmere in June, in the small grey church where his brother lay, because Clara had said the dead should be near the living on such a day, and Julian had turned his face away when she said it, so that she would not see what it did to him. The boy Thomas carried the ring. It was not the old gold crest which Julian wore still and would wear until he died, and passed to the child on the steps who had waited for him in the cold. It was a plain new band, and Clara had chosen it, and inside it she had asked to have set 3 small words, not "I love you," which they had said and would say, but a thing that was only theirs, the thing she had understood in a yard at midnight, and he had proved on the steps of a grey house. It said simply, "Seen at last." They live there yet, as far as any traveler on the Bath Road may learn, in a grey stone house that keeps its candles burning late. And in a common room 4 miles from the nearest town of any size, a new sign creaks in the wind above a door, a bell and a thistle and a sprig of ravensbane in dark green, and the innkeeper who painted it will tell any guest who asks that it marks the house where a stranger once came in from the rain, wearing a ring he could not take off, and was, for 3 days, and then for all his life, simply a man who had, at last, been seen. If Clara's story moved you, stay a moment in it before you go, and remember the woman you know who has never once been stopped for. The road can still turn for her. It turned for this one.